my health started going downhill, like quite rapidly in terms of presented symptoms like a chest infection. And I was just really struggling to breathe, quite like an extensive cough. I was feeling super run down. And then what transpired was eventually, fast forward to June, and I couldn't walk 100 meters. I couldn't walk 50 meters. Like, if you've ever heard someone with an awful lung disease called emphysema, the wheeze is so bad that you can barely talk. And that was me. My going to sleep was incredibly difficult. I would wake up. If I went to sleep, I would be on 4 pillows, like propped up, because when you're up, it's much easier to breathe for your airwaves, they're open. And then I would wake up gasping for breath, like gasping. And that's one of the scariest things, actually, is when you wake up gasping. And I set off at 5 a.m. from Battersea, and I met my wonderful friend Anka on my first day. She met me just outside Peckham, and we rode to Dover together. And I had my 20 kgs of luggage on my back, including my work laptop, and and my tent. And we headed down together. And I remember we got to the ferry, and I was like, "Oh, do you have to go?"
Welcome back to the Toughest Finish Line podcast with me, Jen Doan. Now, there can be moments in life that make you stop and rethink everything. Moments where the things that you once took for granted, like walking, talking, and breathing, suddenly become the toughest challenges you'll ever face. In this episode, we're joined by Emma Cole, who shares the incredible story of how an initially unexplained illness during the COVID pandemic brought her life to a standstill. Almost overnight, the passions that had always defined her were taken away. Breathing became difficult. Things like walking became a challenge. But through this, Emma found a new perspective. Realizing just how precious and fragile life can be, Emma made a decision that if she got the chance to rebuild, she was going to make the most of it. The mindset led her back to her passion of sports, setting ambitious goals, embracing new challenges, and refusing to let her illness define the rest of her story. Today, Emma is not only back doing what she loves, but also has become a podcast host herself, sharing people's passions to inspire others. This time, though, she's the other side of the microphone to share her. This is an honest, inspiring conversation that reminds us all not to wait for the perfect moment, but to chase the things that matter. Here's Emma Cole. So welcome to the podcast, Emma Cole. Now, I'm delighted to have you on, Emma, because as a journalist and a podcast host yourself, you're often the other side of the microphone. But you've got such an inspiring story that I was delighted to have you on for an episode. So welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Jen, I'm so well, and I'm delighted to be on your podcast. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries at all. So you've done some pretty mammoth and unique challenges as well, which is why I loved your story. But I want to start with a condition that you were diagnosed with, which is one that I think affects so many people globally and lots of people are living with on a day-to-day basis, and often puts people off from doing sport. So I wanted to start with that, of your diagnosis of chronic asthma. So can you go back to the time when you were first diagnosed and how that diagnosis came about, and maybe what the symptoms were that you were presented with at the time?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one because it took me 2 to 3 years for a full diagnosis. Wow. And because it all happened during COVID, which
Right.
was a terrible time to I basically had adult onset asthma through allergies. So it all happened April 2020. My health started going downhill, like quite rapidly in terms of presented symptoms like a chest infection. And I was just really struggling to breathe, quite like an extensive cough. I was feeling super run down. And yeah, the kind of thing you'd think it was a chest infection. So at the time, I went on antibiotics for the chest infection. Again, this is all over the phone. I couldn't see anyone because of COVID. And there was also a massive problem with the fact that my symptoms also could have been COVID, which meant that I was very much, things were quite difficult to get any much more information than it's COVID, because it wasn't COVID. And then what transpired was, eventually, fast forward to June, and I couldn't walk 100 meters. I couldn't walk
Wow.
50 meters. Like, if you've ever heard someone with an awful lung disease called emphysema, the wheeze is so bad that you can barely talk. And that was me, someone that is like the biggest fan of sports, like sports my whole life. And I'd gone from regularly doing sport to not being able to walk 10 meters, let alone up a hill. And yeah, that was really tough. And I was working in a very intense job at the time, and I barely could sleep. Because you're coughing so much, you also tend to throw up quite a lot. So my going to sleep was incredibly difficult. I would wake up. If I went to sleep, I would be on 4 pillows, like propped up, because when you're up, it's much easier to breathe for your airwaves. They're open. And then I would wake up gasping for breath, like gasping. And that's one of the scariest things, actually, is when you wake up gasping and you're kind of, in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., and you're trying to do your breathing relaxation. I'd always have a kettle or thermos of tea next to my bed with honey. And, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., I'm there sat on my bed having a little hot drink, trying to
Oh,
make everything a bit
goodness.
better. And the scariest thing, I think, with asthma is you have to stay calm. Like, being zen is the most important thing. But during that time, I didn't know I had asthma. I had no idea what it was until things got so bad that I am very stubborn as well. So I should have gone to A&E earlier. Like, looking back, I should have gone earlier. But it was June the 8th. It was on a Saturday. I remember like it was yesterday. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. Went to A&E, and straight away you're put in the red zone, which was the COVID zone, which for someone who knew, like, I knew I didn't have COVID. So it kind of was even scarier to be like, I really don't want to get COVID right now, because things are quite challenging. And then I remember lying in the hospital bed, and all these people had all these tests. It was wonderful. Like, I finally had answers, and I had all this medication, and suddenly I was like, I just had such a good time. And it's funny to say that, but it was because these people were listening to me, and I was having face-to-face conversations about what was going on. And I had so many tests. And then a group of about 3 to 4 doctors came in, and they were like, your allergy markers are off the charts. And I was like, brilliant. And they were like, I think we know what it is. You're having, like, it's an allergy induced, they didn't use the word asthma. It's an allergy induced thing that's happening right now. So you're gonna go see an allergist, and went through all of that. And so I went to go see this wonderful allergist, lovely consultant. And what transpired was that I'm allergic to feathers, dust, pollen, cats, dogs, but nothing super crazy. So you have, like, on your arm, they do little dots, and they see what comes up, and tree pollen was a big one. But nothing that was actually corresponding to my symptoms, my severe symptoms. But anyway, the allergy thing is just quite funny, because I had a feather duvet, and I was essentially lying in my bed suffocating myself, is what the allergist said. Yeah, fascinating.
My goodness.
Yeah, so that was interesting. And then I then went to go see respiratory consultants that did loads of lung function tests. And the type of asthma that I have is called eosinophilic asthma. So it's to do with it's a subtype of asthma, and it presents as very severe, and it's not very common, typically adult onset. But the key thing is your FeNO number. So that's your inflammation in your airways number, essentially, caused by eosinophils. I always can't really say it correctly.
You're doing well.
And that is my problem, is those white blood cells being too numerous in my airways, causing the inflammation. So that was a really interesting thing to find out. And this is like 2 years down the line, God knows how many consultants. And at one point I was on 5 different medications a day. And then, as a side of asthma, so when you have something called an exacerbation, that's when you're reaching a point where the inflammation is so bad that your medication, your typical medication that might be an inhaler, for me, it would be an antihistamine. It might be something called Montelukast, which tends to keep your airways open at night. You might have another inhaler. That's not working. And so when you have an exacerbation as an asthma sufferer, they put you on oral steroids, like prednisolone is a classic. One point in 5 months, I had 5 courses of oral steroids, which is which you're obviously not meant to have. And that's a prime
Yeah.
example of an asthma which is not under control. So most asthma sufferers, well, every asthma sufferer should have like an asthma plan, which shows you, where you are at the moment, what you could, like how your medication helps you, and should be able to help you spot when things get worse. And nothing was working on my asthma plan, which then brought me to a brilliant result, actually, which has changed my life. So when you have severe eosinophilic asthma, one of the solutions, because this type of asthma doesn't typically, is not typically well managed by typical medication. And there's these new things called biologics, which you inject into yourself. And mine is an inhibitor of the white blood cell.
Okay. Yeah.
So this helps my FeNO number stay down. And I got onto that in December 2024, and it's been life-changing.
Goodness. And it's funny, isn't it? Because I think people say asthma, but it's never really knowing exactly what is asthma. They might have a little bit of an idea. And I think you often associate it with children more, don't you? You think you think back to the inhalers that you saw people taking at school. And so, for you at that period of time, and you mentioned like going during COVID and everybody's isolated anyway. And, fitness was a big part of your life. And how horrible and scary was it at the time for you when you're waking up kind of gasping for breath, you can't get out? How did you get through that time?
Yeah, I mean, it was really tough. I was really lucky at the time because I was living in London, and then when the sort of lockdown hit, my parents were like, right, like come back. So me and my brother went to go stay with my parents, and they
Right.
live in the countryside. So that was like, because both my housemates had moved back to their parents, and
Okay.
for a bit, I was home alone in a flat in London, and that wasn't fun. And thank goodness I moved back, because there was also this there's also this idea that potentially we had black mold in the flat, and that could have been a trigger for lots of my symptoms and stuff. So this is completely like speculation, and I'm never going to know what caused it. But anyway, so being in the countryside, you know, my family just took such good care of me. And yeah, I love sports so much. So for me, it was like a huge motivation to get back to a good spot. And I think, like breathing, as soon as you can't breathe, you're like, oh my God, this is the most valuable thing ever. I need to get better. It's like, when you have a really bad cold and you're like, oh my God, I love my nasal passages. Like, I wish they would come, like you suddenly have this huge appreciation. And that's what it was like. It was like, how lucky am I to be able to breathe normally?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we just all take for granted so much, isn't it? And yet, I was doing a little bit of research before the episode, and roughly speaking, that there's 363 million people living with asthma globally, approximately 7.2 million in the UK alone, where breathing is difficult at times
Yeah.
for them, and it's such a huge thing, isn't it? And thank goodness you're able to go back to your parents. And I guess that's one of my questions. Saying about the allergies that you mentioned about, and potentially the mold, and not knowing necessarily what the cause of it was. But is it common that it can just have an onset within adulthood? Is there often a trigger like the allergies that can impact it?
So with my specific asthma, no one really knows. I've read that
Right.
there's, allergies can be a part of it, as can genetics, as can people aren't sure. That's the bottom line of it. It's just, unfortunately, it's a subtype that is very severe. But these biologics, I should say, are unbelievable the way they can help people. And it's not just asthma, but a lot of chronic inflammation conditions. More and more people, if you have a severe case, you will hopefully get put on biologics.
Yeah.
And, you know, instead of 5 different medication, you've got one thing a month. So I just have one injection a month and one inhaler.
Hmm. It's
Unbelievable.
incredible. It's amazing. And so do you now, does that kind of stop all the symptoms that you were presenting with, like the breathlessness and things, or do you have kind of attacks and flare-ups at times?
So I wish it was easy to say. It's absolutely groovy. So part of my so I think with asthma, it's always for me, it's always going to be a little bit up and down.
Yeah.
I know, for example, if I'm really tired, if I've if I've had quite a bit to drink the night before, the next day I will be symptomatic. The days before my injection is due, I will be feeling a little bit worse. I have lots of triggers. So if it's like pollution, smoke, particularly sort of environmental pollution, that sort of thing will be uncomfortable. It won't, I'm not going to be gasping for air, thank goodness. But there's definitely things you have to look out for. Like I have a synthetic duvet. I am synthetic central. um, Things like that. I think I've noticed stuff with hay fever as well. I went through a stage of having really bad hay fever, and I think that was all linked to it. And suddenly that's not appearing. I don't take an antihistamine anymore. I don't have symptoms like that. And the other thing you do have is that I have struggled to smell ever since this all happened. Yeah, so that, and I didn't realize at first, but I lost my sense of smell for quite a few years, which is very common with my type of asthma. And I actually had the flu the other week. And ever since having the flu, I've been able to smell, which has been
Wow.
mental. Yeah. So I think it's going to be a journey. You never know what's going to change, but I'm hopeful that, yeah, things just keep getting better.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? That flu can cure your loss of smell. I mean, who'd have thought it, hey? Oh, it
I
must be
know.
one of those things that you're like taking for granted and you're so grateful to have back.
Honestly, like sense of smell is just makes life so rich and joyful. And for years I didn't know what my hair smelled like. I didn't know what I had no, I'd spray 2 things of perfume on and my boyfriend would be like, "Oh my God, why have you got so much on?" I was like, "Oh, is it strong?" No idea. The same with food and
Wow.
tasting food. I could
Yeah.
eat such spicy food, it wouldn't even touch the sides. I was like, I've got nothing. All I could taste was like bitterness, texture, if something was sour. And now even when I have a tomato, I'm like, oh my goodness, the flavor is unreal. But I will caveat that by saying a lot of people have an operation because a lot of it is to do with like the blockages in your sinuses. You develop these things called nasal polyps that again affects your smell, can give you a lot of sinus pain. Touch wood, I've been okay so far, but my sense of smell I think will come and go.
Right.
But it's a hilarious thing being like, now I can smell.
That's It's amazing how the body works, isn't it? And absolutely, like for everybody listening, and I'm definitely not going to take it for granted that I can breathe, smell, and taste. Because yeah, the thought of losing any of those is quite scary. And yeah, it just shows how far you've come from that time of struggling to breathe, not being able to sleep, and thank goodness that you've managed to kind of begin to work out that medication. And are there any particular, for somebody who might be thinking, oh, some of this is resonating with me, I've maybe got some of these things. Are there any kind of warning signs that you think maybe on reflection you kind of put to something else or put it down to something else that you could look back and say, actually, that was a warning sign for what was to come?
I think a majority of it is sort of chest pain, wheezing, not feeling, you're going for a walk and you're quite a fit person and something doesn't feel right. I would also say with conversations with consultants, like, your body best. Obviously, they have to try various things. So you have to go through the motions, but don't be afraid to ask for a second opinion or go back
Yeah.
and say it isn't working. I think, um, there are obviously so many things need to be ruled out, but just keep championing yourself, and hopefully you'll get some answers.
Yeah, definitely. And especially in the world of COVID at the time, that must have been a real needle in the haystack job trying to work out what was going on and find that root cause. And is there, from somebody who is, has experienced asthma and that type of not being able to breathe, what advice would you give to somebody who might be trying to support somebody with an asthma attack or something? Is there anything that's really helped you when you're in that moment of struggling with your breathing?
Yeah, I think I would say everyone is different. So the first thing to
Hmm.
do is to find out what that person, what works for them. For me, and also find out what their inhaler looks like. They might have two, they might have a reliever that tends to be blue. They might have, I forget the name of the other one, and that might be brown or red,
Yeah.
but everyone is different. So just make sure you know what to look for, and to know its location. Usually asthma, if someone has asthma, you hope that they have their reliever at least on them, um, and to know where that is. For me, the key thing is if I'm feeling like an asthma attack is coming on, you get a feeling, and it's sort of like someone's stamping on your chest, your airways lock up, and it gets really difficult to breathe. And the most important, there's various techniques you can do. So one of them is called pursed lip breathing. Um, and you literally just purse your lips and breathe, and that helps. Um, for, for me, the key thing is calmness. You can see if someone is alarmed, it can also alarm you, and that can increase your panic, because what you want to do is try to stop panicking. And so for me, I just require complete sense of zen, and for someone to breathe at a rate that I can copy them at, because then that distracts you, and that can really help slow down your breathing and actually get you into a good rhythm. This is obviously like, before an asthma attack happens. If an asthma attack
Yeah.
happens, you need to call 999, find their inhaler. There's usually a rule of thumb, 4 puffs. It's called 444, and I would definitely recommend checking out exactly what you need to do there. But yeah, it's usually a sense of calm.
I love that. And that's such helpful information because I think, for you yourself going through it, but also for somebody watching it, it's scary thinking that person can't breathe. But actually, the best thing you're going to do is remain that calm person and just focusing on that breathing. So, such great, useful information there. And I just find it amazing because it's something that came on in your adulthood that you've been going through. And for somebody who was and is so into sports, you're a shining example of how you can keep going. And so I want to come on to your sporting career, shall I say? Um, because as you say, you have an absolute love of sport and fitness. And were you always a sporty person when you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, sport has just forever been my favorite thing, along with like sport, words, and nature, I'd say, like
Okay.
my trio of joy. And ever since I was a kid, I've played all sorts of sports, from, you know, high level hockey, tennis, football. I was so lucky. I went to a school where you could play all sorts of sport. So I played netball, lacrosse, badminton, squash, you know, if there was basketball, I mean, and at uni as well, I obviously played a lot of sports. It brings me so much joy, both in terms of the action of doing it and the community and the way it unites people. And I just love it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And have you found that since having your asthma, that stopped you from doing a lot of the things? Obviously at the time when it was peak diagnosis, but how has it been managing that since?
Yeah, I mean, so because things have been up and down since sort of the beginning, there's been moments when I've been able to do loads, and then I've had to cut back because I've had major exacerbations and things haven't been so great. Um, but for a while now, ever since being on the injection, it's been glorious.
That's incredible, isn't it? How somebody who was literally in bed struggling to walk at all can now be symptom free and kind of, as you say, you
Yeah.
have those ups and downs, but can get back to something that you are so passionate about and you do love. And And so I want to talk about some of your sporting challenges because, as I said at the beginning, they're such amazing ones, and a couple that you've done are just so unique and kind of bespoke to you as a person. So, what was your first big challenge that you did, and when was that?
So after June 2020, when I hit rock bottom, then I sort of built myself back up and I said, you know, I've got this renewed appreciation for my ability to breathe, my cardio, my, joy of doing sport. So it was actually quite a weird one because my grandma had vascular dementia. And I remember I was on Instagram and it was called the Alzheimer's Research UK Treble Challenge. And it was just an advert. And I was like, what's this? And I clicked through and I was like, this is exactly what I want. It was an accumulator triathlon. And obviously, me being me, I went for the biggest distance possible. And it was called, I can't remember the exact name. Unfortunately, they don't do it anymore, but they did. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those things, challenges come and go. But my one was, I gave myself, I think in the end, it took me 3.5 months. And it was a total distance of swim 30K, cycle 1500K, and run 300K. And so it was accumulator. So you just added up your distances and kept going. And I wanted to raise money for Alzheimer's Research UK for my grandma. And the company I was working for at the time were doing a scheme where if you raise money for charity, they would double the amount that you raised. And so the stars just aligned. And I was like, brilliant, here I go. So bear in mind, I was starting from a very, very bad place of fitness and feeling. And I remember I ran 1K and then I ran 2K. And I remember the day I ran 4K and I came home and I was like, this is unbelievable. But I just took it so slowly. And, the only pressure I was putting on was me. And then, so I was just slowly building. I'd go to the local pool and it gave me so much purpose. And then I realized, because I wanted to finish by end of September and I finished in middle of October. But my big issue was cycling 1,500 kilometers. I mean, I've always cycled like for commuting and the joy of it and, but I'd never really done it, put an effort in, shall we say. And I was like, right, took a week off work and decided I was going to cycle 700 kilometers down from like Newbury to the New Forest, across all the way to Folkestone, and then back through a place called Brightling and up through Guildford and then back. That was my loop. And I was like, oh, here we go. I mean, I was so inexperienced and hadn't thought it through. It was glorious. I'd never ridden with my bags on my bike. So for the first time, on my first day as I was setting off, I got on my bike and I was like, what is this? It's hugely different having bags on your bike. Anyway, and off I went. And I started off in my like clip-in shoes. Within about 2 days, I was in my trainers. And I just pootered along and it was amazing. And I just felt so happy. And I was lucky I had friends along the route that I could stay with. I booked myself into some, Airbnbs and people were so jolly. This one lady made me a protein shake when I arrived and got me all these snacks and packed me a breakfast to go. And I just, it was just such a joy. And it was just in a break before the next COVID lockdown. So I got really lucky that I was able to do it then. And I mean, I pushed my bike a fair bit of the way. I definitely cried up some hills around Eastbourne.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Yeah. And I just learned so much and I loved it. And it just, it kind of brought me back to feeling like myself.
I mean, that's incredible just to go, right, I'm just going to go and do it by myself. Never had it cycled that far before. And just to set off. And do you think that was part of your, not that it's recovery because your condition is one that's going to be forever, but did that help you get through that time, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've always loved an adventure. That for me is always like just that thrill of doing something that's unknown. And I think particularly with sport, you also get that thrill, but you get the mental
Yeah.
side of it. You get such mental clarity, you get such peace of mind.
Yeah.
And it's human powered. And I think there's a lot of joy in that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just amazing. And so you've since gone on to do ultra marathons and also an epic solo cycling adventure, which was cycling from London to Tunisia. How on earth did that come about? Where did that idea come from? And where do you start to begin with planning the route?
I mean, so yeah, it was one of the best things I've ever done. At the time, I was working for Cyclist magazine as the features writer. So it was all sort of very lucky that I could make that work. And it all started because one of my best friends was living in Tunisia,
Right.
and we had been at our friend's wedding, and it was like, when are we going to see each other again? And I was like, I'd love to come to Tunisia, but I don't really want to get a plane. And as a joke, she goes, well, why don't you cycle there? I was like, she's called Lisa. And I was like, Lisa, you're a genius. That's exactly what I'm going to do. She was like, what? I was joking. And I was like, I'm going to speak to my editor. So I go back to work and I was like, I've got this idea. I passed it through, spoke to a few colleagues about it. And I was like, do you think this is going to work? And my plan was to write a lot of features about it and, do it half work, half enjoyment.
Yeah.
They were like, we love it. Let's make it happen. And, I was so lucky. I reviewed all my kit that I used. I wrote like a lot of diary pieces about it. And it was just phenomenal. And I mean, in terms of planning, I used Komoot, but I'm not a big planner. So I knew the direction that I was going. So I
That way.
couldn't yeah, south. So you can't cycle through Algeria. Like, it's very difficult to get visas. You can, but it's very difficult to get visas. So I knew that my route was going to be down through Italy and then take the ferry.
Right.
I I just I was living in London again at the time, and in all fairness, I'd been looking for a way out of London. I felt like I needed an excuse to get out of there and to do something different. And this was my way of doing it. I mean, quite extreme. And I set off at 5 a.m. from Battersea, and I met my wonderful friend Anka on my first day. She met me just outside Peckham, and we rode to Dover together all day. And I had my 20 kgs of luggage on my back, including my work laptop. And and my tent, and we headed down together. And Anchor was amazing. That was like the best first day I could have asked for. And I remember we got to the ferry and I was like, oh, do you have to go? And then, I arrived in Calais, and then my campsite was about 30k down. So it was a big first day, about 150k, but it was perfect. It's almost like you need that start. And then I set up my tent, and I remember I got an extra large pizza at the campsite and a little half a small beer, and I was like,
Love it.
I'm doing it.
Yeah, you are. I mean, that's just amazing. Just to go, right, this is just what I'm going to go and do. And linking it in with your work and all of that is incredible. And was there, just going back to your asthma, because obviously you're going abroad, you're traveling, you're a long way from potentially medical care and things like that. Was there planning that you had to put in place to keep you safe? Or was it, let's just go and see how I get on?
So at that point, I wasn't on the injection.
Right.
The injection kit. So that was June 2023. So 3 years after it all happened, and then it was December 24 that I got my injection. So in my entire time of my cycle, I felt amazing. Obviously, I had my inhaler, and I had it close to me, and I had several inhalers, but not once did I mean, I took my inhaler every day, as that's like what you're meant to do. But not once did I struggle with my breathing or anything like that, which, you know, I hadn't really thought about the consequences of that. I think I'd felt very much like, I don't want this to hold me back. And I'm just going to go for it. I think life's so short, so I might as well just see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And go out there and see what I'm capable of. And yeah, I always think about, how lucky I was that nothing from a respiratory point of view was a problem. I mean, I came back and a couple of months later, it all went downhill. But for some reason, the universe allowed me to have this incredible experience.
I mean, it's just, but do you think there's an element of it that because you were so active, you're in the countrysides, that helped keep you safe and keep your airways clear? Or would that not have paid that? Was it completely by chance?
It's so hard because then I think, well, okay, triggers would be
Mm.
pollen,
Yeah,
pollution,
true.
all the
Yeah.
things that exist. Like that's what I find really hard about my asthma is that, and I just don't really know. I mean, I know so much about it, but some of it just feels a little bit nonsensical.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it's that pot luck, isn't it, which makes it so difficult to be able to manage it and work it through. So thank goodness the stars were aligned and you were healthy for all that ride. And so how many kilometers was the ride that you did?
It was about 2,300 kilometers, which I did in 18 days. In Yeah, I had pitched to my editor, I think I'd pitched about 15 or 16. So I was like, "Ooh," but I also, obviously it was a lot harder than I ever expected. There were, but it was also amazing, but it was a lot harder than I expected. And the ferries from Italy to Tunisia, there weren't as many as I had imagined. Again, not a big planner. So when I was not far from, when I was about 140k inland from Civitavecchia, which is just above Rome, my friend, she calls me and she says, "What are you doing about the ferries?" And I was like, I'll have a look later. She was like, "No, it's a public holiday. I've looked and there's not another ferry for 2 weeks. There also aren't many tickets left. You need to get on the ferry tomorrow." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I yes. So
Pedal!
my last day, I got my fastest time in my whole 18 days as I just bombed it. And I arrived at the ticket. I was in complete disbelief that I'd even made it that far. I never even let myself envisage making it because I just knew it was something I deemed, such a wonderful, amazing thing to be able to do. But would I be able to do it? I didn't know. So I'd never let myself imagine properly making it. I get to the ticket booth and I mean, I am drenched in sweat. It was also very hot doing this. I had temperatures of like plus 36 degrees. And, I was not a pretty sight going into the ticket hall with my bike. I sort of bumbled out some words like, any chance of a ticket? And they were like, "Yes, of course, madam. Like, here you go. Gave me my ticket and off you pop." I can't remember, exactly where the ferry was, but I then had to cycle that little bit further to go
No.
get to the ferry. And at this point, time is ticking. I'm like, a ferry port's actually a bit of a maze.
Yeah.
I'm in, my brain is not working that well. I'm obviously completely out of water and food and all things. And at this point, I'm just like asking lots of people where on earth the ferry to Tunis is. And finally, I get there, I rock up, and I think it must have been the most ridiculous entrance because you go into like the pedestrian area. I go in, I literally put my bike like prop up against the side, slump on the floor, and I'm pretty sure I just burst into tears. And everyone's like,
Oh my goodness.
still wearing my helmet. And I'm literally in complete disbelief, take some photos, send to my friend to be like, "You'll never guess what? I'm waiting to board."
There's nothing to help give you a kick up the backside to get going faster than a ferry, the last
Yeah.
ferry in the day. But I mean, when you were sitting there, kind of just sobbing on the floor there, was there a time when you looked back and you just went, "I did it and I made that"? Was there learning that you took from that experience?
Oh, I mean, my motto the whole way was, "We're doing it." That's what I kept saying to
Love
myself.
that.
Moments of like total disbelief, and I was like, "Oh, looking at a big old climb, thinking, no thanks." were doing it. And like, I just kept doing it. And that's how I made it. And I think, yeah, it taught me so much. The power of the human mind,
Yeah.
particularly the mental side of things. I rarely listen to music. And I think also the power of community. Some of the people I met along the way were just glorious. And sometimes it was a split second, that moment when you interact with maybe a
Yeah.
shopkeeper or someone waves at you in the street, or you meet a fellow cyclist and you spend a day or a couple of days cycling together, and or you just have a chat on the side of the road and you're like, oh, how lucky am I to get to meet all these wonderful people. And then also just the beauty of traveling human powered. I think the bicycle can take you so far in a really peaceful, lovely way. And yeah, I would encourage anyone, if they're thinking of doing a bikepacking trip, to make it happen in whatever way you want it to. Doesn't need to be some big old challenge. It can be literally, pedaling in your local area. There's just something about being on a bike.
Yeah, I love that. And I often say to my athletes that I coach, if they're thinking about which race do, I think about, I always say, which part of the world do you want to go and explore? Like, where do you want to see? Because you get to see so much on the bike that you would never see if you're, staying in a resort or even driving it. You just get to see the most incredible places, don't you? And so, with that in mind, is there a favorite moment or a favorite place that you went through on that trip?
Oof. I mean, I was very lucky. It was very beautiful. It only rained when I was in my tent, I think, which was
Wow.
a dream come true. And I should say I didn't get a single puncture. Had I got a lot of mechanicals, it could be a different story. So I was extremely lucky. Again, the universe really looking out for me. But I think one of my top moments has to be the Gotthard Pass in Switzerland. And this is I want to say 2,000 meter climb summit. That's the right word. 2,000
Yep.
meter summit. And in my head, I knew it was going to be really hard. I knew that I'm not very good at climbing, and mentally that's where I struggle. And I was so lucky that I met two lovely cyclists just as the rain was coming in, and hadn't planned my accommodation that night. And I was like on the side of the road looking at my phone thinking, what am I going to do? And suddenly two cyclists called Marco and Valentina, uni students at a Swiss university, rocked up beside me and said, hello, what are you up to? I was like, oh, I need to go up the Gotthard Pass tomorrow. I'm just wondering like where to sleep. And they were like, oh, we're going to sleep in this Airbnb hotel auberge. Do you want to join us? I was like, I'd love to. So there we were in our triple room suddenly, and having pizza and chatting and having this wonderful evening together. Got up at the crack of dawn next day and up we went the Gotthard Pass all together. And they were just incredible. They didn't have much luggage, but they also didn't pressure me, and they didn't. I think also when you're going to be slower, you can feel like, oh God, they're waiting for me.
Yeah.
But there was nothing of a sort. It was just, we were all doing it together on our own accord, and it was one of the jolliest experiences. And I got to the top and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe I'd made it, because that for me was, I think it was around, just topping over 1,000 kilometers that I would have cycled, maybe even a bit further. And I knew that if I could get over the Gotthard Pass, I could make it. Like, I knew that was the hardest part. I was wrong, but I knew in my head, I thought it was the hardest bit. And at the top of that climb, it's cloudy. I think it's about to rain. And there's a picture and it's like, up my chin, and I'm there just grinning from ear to ear. And I was like, couldn't believe I did it.
Amazing. And this is the power of cycling, isn't it? The people that you meet along the way and just the chances of you kind of meeting them, getting accommodation, and then them helping you up that hill. It was obviously meant to be that whole entire trip.
Yeah, it really was. And, I think that's the beauty of sport, is that the people you meet, like no matter what sport you're doing, it's just such a joy when you have those interactions.
Yeah. Absolutely. Which brings me on to one of the final things I wanted to talk to you about, because you also have a brilliant podcast called The Passion Stories, which is all about passions. And obviously, sport is your passion, but The Passion Stories shares wider passions than that, doesn't it? Do you want to talk us through what the podcast is and the people you've had on? Because you've had some great guests on.
And Jen, I've had you on, one of my favorite
I'm
guests.
not talking about myself, no.
But yeah, I have had some amazing people on, and it is a wonderful podcast. And I started it in, weirdly, April 2021, actually, I was doing a journo course, and I remember they did a podcast sort of module, and it really spoke to me. And I went back and I thought to myself, I love interviewing people and asking questions, and I could do it with a podcast. And that sort of gave birth to this idea of the one thing I absolutely love about humans is when they come alive talking about something they really care about. And sport is a really great way of capturing that moment. And that's how it started. And I was so lucky that lots of my friends were like, I was like, please, can I interview you? And, and they were like, yes, okay. And the first ones, I deleted all the breaths from each episode because I thought one doesn't want to hear someone breathing. I was wrong. So I learned a lot. And then I then joined Cyclist magazine and I was on the podcast there. So the passion stories took a back seat. And then when I went freelance, we went again, bigger and better. And I've had some amazing guests on, from National Geographic explorer Bertie Gregory, world record breaking explorers, youngest person to row across the Atlantic, Zara Lackland, total legend, Olympians from winter sports. We had an amazing winter sports series, to, you know, elite runners, environmentalists, creatives. Just had GB track sprinter OJ Edinburgh on, which was so cool. And we've got mountaineer Kenton Cool coming on at some point, which I am so excited for. And yeah, it's just a little snapshot of passion. And I think, for me at least, nowadays, you can get so caught up in the digital world, consumerism, all these marketing messages that we're just getting left, right, and center. And the podcast, hopefully, captures a snippet of joy, of human spirit, of a moment that might make the listener curious, that might provide them with some inspiration, or maybe some sort of escapism, or maybe it will teach them something. And it's sort of that half an hour, 40-minute little break from all the chaos of the real world.
And it's a brilliant listen. I would definitely advise people to go and listen to Emma's podcast, because it is super inspiring. And, talking to you, Emma, about your passion of sport, and your face just lights up. And that's what happens on your podcast, is people are talking about their passions. And, for me, triathlon absolutely wasn't my passion this time 7 years ago. I hadn't even experienced it. And so it's not being afraid to push doors. And you never know, there might be a new passion around the corner, isn't there? That curiosity that your guests are giving people, of maybe I could give that a go.
Exactly. And I think we have this idea of like, you should follow your passion. But what does that mean? And I think it means something different to everyone at some point in their life. Uh, you know, uh, it's so easy to people to say, oh, your career should be your passion, but it doesn't necessarily work that way. And I think that's okay. And my hope is that what people take from it is, maybe I could make that thing that's been bubbling along in my brain for a while. Maybe I can make it happen. Like, maybe I should have that conversation with someone about this thing I want to talk about, or maybe I should try that sport, or maybe I should get, one of my favorite episodes is with this amazing artist called Gaspar Habjanich, and he teaches people how to draw and how to sketch. And he says, just put your sketchbook and your pencil out, have it on the kitchen table. And that for me is like, you've just made being able to do that just feel so simple. And he just really encourages people to take those 5 minutes to draw. And whatever your passion is, like, maybe you can carve out those 5 minutes to do it. And I think we'll all be richer and happier because of it.
I love that. And that's what we want, isn't it? Everybody feeling a little bit more happier with life along the way. Oh, Emma, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been truly a pleasure having you on. And I just want to kind of close with what's next for Emma Cole? Have you got some plans of some big sporting events coming up, or are we cycling across Europe or America next? Have you got any ideas of what you're going to do?
I have some vague plans, but my big challenge coming up is a 5K swim in Malta, which is called a Half Ocean Man. And it's a big challenge for me because I'm not very confident in the sea. I'm constantly convinced I'm going to get eaten by sharks. So this year, what I've been working on is like swimming in a streamlined way, and I've loved it. I've used this amazing app called Catch, and it's kind of like Runner but for swimming, and it's taught me so much about swimming. Like, I'm not from a swimming background. I've never, you know, been into swimming or anything like that, and it's given me such an appreciation for the sport. And that's why each sport can teach you different things. And for me, swimming, it's so mental as well. And I'm staring into the murky green water sometimes thinking, oh my God, there's about to be a shark. Or, I see something flicker in my goggles and my brain just switches. And I'm lucky I have a very supportive boyfriend that will often swim alongside me, and is very kind when I have those moments of meltdown. But yeah, so that is end of September, I think it is. So I will be in the sea, in the deep water, trying to not get eaten by a shark.
You won't. You'll be absolutely fine. And if people want to follow your story, how's the best way for them to do that?
You can check out my Instagram, which is Emma S.E. Cole, or also check out the Passion Stories podcast.
Amazing. Well, good luck for September. Those sharks will be staying away, I'm sure of it. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing all about asthma. I've learned so much about it, and hopefully that can just inspire somebody if they are going through similar to what you went through, that, that it doesn't have to be the end of the road, that you can go on and do amazing treks across the country if you want to. But if not, you can just keep moving forward. So thank you, Emma, so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. And I would just say, if anyone is struggling with asthma and wants to talk about it, just drop me a DM. Always happy to chat. And thank you so much, Jen.
Amazing. Thanks, Emma.